So a topic we've been talking about a lot lately on LinkedIn is communication in terms of developers, their communication skills, and how important is that really to developer effectiveness? Well, I'm here to tell you that it is extremely important. And further, to hammer that point home, I thought we'd go through some math to actually talk about it. So it turns out, so let's talk about comm skills for short. And just as a baseline, what percentage of a conversation, let's say actually this regards face-to-face conversations, according to psychology studies, what percentage of a face-to-face conversation is actually retained? It turns out that it's 50 to 80%. So 50 to 80% is what we'll call, the signal retention. So that means that up to half is lost. And if you're like me and you're maybe not a particularly good listener, then maybe you're on that 50% side of that equation, that you're only getting half of what people are saying. So when you're talking to a client, when you're trying to understand requirements and things like that, naturally there's miscommunication that happens, but it will vary. And so this is sort of a baseline number. Now, what does that do to delivery of a product? Well, if you're in the startup world, or frankly, if you're working on a new product that you're releasing for the first time to customers, then you're familiar with the notion of product market fit, or PMF. And product market fit has a lot to do, with communication with clients and figuring out exactly what they need, exactly what they're looking for. So that's communication right there. It's obviously taking that communication, building the appropriate product, and then iterating on that and continuing to iterate until you get to a good place. And so let's just, take some different examples and walk through, how signal loss based on communication can actually impact the relationship and impact how fast software development and the project actually gets done, or work gets done to having a successful product. So the simplest example would be, let's say, a CTO level person. And let's assume that a CTO level person is a good communicator. So they're at the high end of this spectrum. They retain 80%. So the CTO level developer communicates directly with the customer. So in that case, that direct case, that means that, and I'll just use decimals to express here, 0.8, or 80% of the information that the customer conveyed to the CTO, it actually comes across, and then the CTO builds against that, and that would result in, again, this is a simplistic model, but that would result in about an 80% completion of the asks, on that first try. Assuming that we're not talking about something that is bleeding edge science where fundamentally you have to research and discover how to build this new product, assuming it's sort of baseline stuff, then that's where you would end up. So you have some information loss, and then you have to, iterate, because you've gotten, say, 80% of the way there on the first try. And then the last 20%, you then have a follow-up conversation with the client on that last, okay, what was the stuff? What was missing? You have that conversation. But here's the key. There's information loss in that second conversation. And so what ends up happening is that you get 0.8, which was the originally completed product or project work, plus the 0.2 that's left over, and then that is impacted by another round of 80% sort of signal retention. And what you end up with is 0.8 plus 0.16. So now you're 96% of the way there. Not 96% of the way to product market fit, by the way, but you're 96% of the way, in theory, to what this one particular person asked for or talked about. This is the best possible case. In this case, it took 2 iterations, and we're just going to use, for the purposes of our explanation or our conversation, we're going to use the notion, sort of a cutoff line of 95% as being, functionally complete. So it took 2 iterations to get there, or we might call that 2 units of work, for a CTO working directly with the customer, a CTO who communicates well, to get to completion. So how does it look? How does this same kind of an equation look if we're talking about a different case? Let's just take the CTO. So we still are working with CTO level talent, but we've got a CTO, and now the CTO has got a biz co-founder, I'm just going to call them. So somebody on the business side who really has the requirements, understands what this product is, understands the industry, and then the customer is at the end of that chain. So now we've got a little bit of telephone going on, maybe not a ton, but we've got a little bit more. So what we see now is that if both of these people, if everybody involved, actually everybody, if everybody involved is a good communicator, then we've got two layers. So we've got 0.8 times 0.8. And so we might have something like 0.64 or 64% of the signal making it through, two-layer hop. And we can see how this compounding, I mean, again, if you're familiar with the game of telephone and you've seen that, when a message passes through, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 people, and those are super simple messages, how much they can contort. Well, when you're talking about detailed requirements for a product where everybody's got different notions, everybody's got different asks, this compounds very, very rapidly. And by the way, I'm using the example of CTO level talent and a business co-founder, and both are good communicators, communicating with a customer who is also good at expressing themselves. Any of those could be false. Let's take the opposite, right? Let's assume that both folks are perhaps more average in their communication or maybe falling to the lower end of that spectrum. So what if it was 0.5 times 0.5? You can see the drop-off right here in communication and how rapidly it occurs. Now, you're less than half. Less than half of the information is getting across to make a credible first pass of the product. So first cut, you're only going to be 25% of the way there. So then you got to do it again, and you got to do it again, and you got to do it again, and you're going to end up with a magnitude, greater number of iterations as a result. So it turns out, using that formula that I was showing before, that it's not quite linear either. And the number of iterations required to get to a good product, it really explodes. So we can work through more of those examples, but this is sort of, the reason why communication matters so much. You can sort of see the essence of it, even without introducing a larger team, which we'll do next.